In the early 1970s, I was encouraged to go on a internal management training program for sort of middle management thing, and which I really enjoyed. And I mean, I've tried to be a lateral thinker all my life. I've tried to think outside the square a little bit. And I've always used the approach, if you can't go in the front door, look for the side door to go in, if you believe in what you're doing and you believe what you're doing is right. And so I enjoyed the management training, and I could see quite a lot of things that we could do in our physiotherapy department, like introducing a bit more computerisation and in the art, which was of course quite ahead of its time, and certainly in keeping records and so on. And maybe using dictaphones for people out in the community work, because I could see the surgeons use dictaphones when they did ward rounds, and then somebody else would type it up later, and all you need was like a strip comment. And I thought domiciliary physios could do something like that as well. But later on, Christchurch, Canterbury was certainly doing it, and I thought it was a good thing that other people could do. Anyway, I found when I wanted to try and introduce some things in the office and whatever, that it didn't work. And I was saying, I always believe that if you send people on middle management courses, the managers need to go on the same courses or similar courses. Otherwise, you find there's a bit of resistance. There's a glass wall there that you have to break through, because they don't understand what you've been taught. And when you come to try to introduce different concepts into your work practices, if they aren't aware of what they are, sometimes they can feel threatened and you don't actually get a chance to use them. So it can be a bit frustrating. So anyway, a job came up at the Department of Health and Deputy Advisory Physiotherapist. And so in 1976 I applied for that position and got it, and then had to go through a review of that appointment, because there was another person in the public service, a physiotherapist, who was working in education, who'd also applied and obviously didn't get the appointment, and she challenged the appointment, which was an interesting experience, because she was already in the public service and I was joining the public service. So I thought she wasn't involved in all that. The people who appointed me and were responsible for appointing me had to front up to hearings and things like that and make the case, whatever, and I was kept right out of it because I was just the person in the middle. Anyway, the department won the case for their appointment, and so I started in June 1976. As Deputy Advisory Physiotherapist and Deputy Registrar of the Physiotherapy Board, and I was working under Moira Brown at that time. And our roles there were quite comprehensive. We had responsibility between the two of us for visiting all the hospitals around the country, keeping a record of our visit for their files at the Department of Health. And that was a great opportunity to network and just to see what was happening and to be able to give advice. We always visited the senior administration staff as well, the chief executive and the medical superintendent as well. There were always courtesy visits. And it was also a way of getting a message through and a support from the department through whatever perhaps the local physiotherapy department was trying to do. And we could be objective and come and say whether we thought it was a good idea or give it an extra plug or something like that. And also used it as a way of trying to get other hospitals to share information with the physio departments, and if somebody was doing a good thing at one place, maybe another place might like to think of getting in touch with them and seeing how they were doing it or whatever. And then, of course, there was a physiotherapy board role, which was acting as a registrar and secretariat. So we also did the allocation of bursars on bonds, and that was always an interesting exercise. We had first, second and third choices, and we tried to put people where they would like to go. Sometimes we weren't always the choices that people or their families thought they wanted. Some people didn't want to go back to their hometowns, and some people want to be near their boyfriends. And so we tried to do our best, and people had to be over 21 at that time, because that was the legal age for registration, to be in charge of a department. The rest of us who were under that age always had to work with somebody who was the legal age at that time. So that tried to fit everybody in where they wanted and whatever. And sometimes people they had a chance to come back again a little bit later and ask for transfer if they wanted, if they weren't particularly happy. And sometimes people were just transferred because it suited a particular arrangement. Somebody wanted to do a swap or something like that. But it's amazing, people who went to small hospitals benefited from them. In fact, we used to call Waipukurau Hospital the marriage bureau, because about every physio that was sent up there or went there always met somebody, a local farmer or somebody, and got married. You know, you think it's a small place could be a bit dead end. People loved going to the West Coast, and I was sent to Gisborne, and Gisborne was a great place to be and a great camaraderie. They don't do it now, but it was the day we had a hospital Christmas picnic and great Christmas parties. Always, we had great Christmas parties at Wellington Hospital too. The physio department, that's right, was known for its Christmas parties. Everybody wanted an invite to them. Anyway, going back to the health department, and you're giving advice to the minister as well and to the department for various things that came up, as well as advising outwards and sort of monitoring on the physiotherapy benefit that was available that time to private physiotherapists. And you'd attend anytime the Society of Physiotherapists or anybody was going to see the Minister of Health. We were required to attend, to take notes and to keep file notes, because sometimes she wanted to know whether her record of a particular meeting was as she recalled it or whether it was different. So we had notes, you see, which we were required just to take independent notes, and had to send these notes up to the Minister, and there was an outcome from that. But the reason for keeping file notes, and I don't know whether people do it so much these days, but it was always good to refer to, and anybody could, you know, if you've been to see the minister, you often picked up things that some ministerial policy direction or whatever that they added in, so this got fed back into the system. So it was a great sharing of information. You always like to know, you know, what had been said, anything up at the minister's office that got fed back. And then on the registration board, of course, was keeping the register. I mean, the main functions of the registration board was to decide who went on the register, to keep the register, and to take people off the register. That's the three core functions of any registering authority. And of course, the way you do that is varied. So you had to assess. We had to assess the schools, we had to assess overseas graduates, and I always enjoyed that exercise as well, because you get all the information from all the different schools and training programs in the States, Canada, Britain, and so on. And then you know, over time, we sort of, when I was registrar, which I think I became in 1979, when Moira left, after that time, we found the whole training programs all changed internationally, and some countries their training programs became non-registrable because of the way they structured their programs or the standard and things like that. And that was always a big drama when those people applying for registration told that they weren't registrable. I weren't very happy about that sometimes. You know, over time, built up these great data files, and you had to keep check of them. And I would share that information sometimes with the other boards that I subsequently was a member of. And the process, the changing education process, for example, in the UK, when degrees came in, the whole system changed. And in the States, that all changed. People graduated in the States, I'm not sure if it still is, but it became that they could graduate with only a couple of clinical specialties. Well, they became non-registrable in New Zealand because you had to be able to work across the board. And they didn't have chest respiratory therapy much in their training because they had respiratory therapists there, so it made it very tough for people coming from the States. My advisory physiotherapy role was also developing legislation, working on legislation and the policy work required for that. I found I was often, the left hand was writing to the right hand, and I had to be very careful that I used the right letterheads for different things. So the left hand was the Department of Health, on the right hand was the Physiotherapy Board, and the department might be writing to the Physiotherapy Board about something it didn't like, or the Physiotherapy Board might be writing to the Department of Health. But you had to, you're doing different roles, and you had to change hats sometimes, and I was very clear that the right hat went on the right thing, and if one was criticising the other, so be it. It was just a fact of life, a fact of doing it. Some people found very hard to understand that you could do two different roles, but I divided up all the files, and they were all blurred when I joined the Department of Health, so we separated out all the Physiotherapy Board files for the Department of Health files, because I felt that that was a totally separate, set up under statute, and it was nothing to do with the Department of Health, what it went on in those registration board files. It was a registering body set up and working under a piece of legislation. So that was the way I worked all through that time.